Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. This is a story of two agents, one Indian, one American. Let's start with the American agent, David Coleman Headley, half American, half Pakistani. He was an informant for the US Drug Enforcement Agency. He infiltrated the Lashkar-e-Taiba in 2006. Evidently, he was part of a US effort to locate 9/11 mastermind Osama bin Laden. This is the terrorist who had killed thousands of Americans September 11, 2001. But Headley and his partner, a Canadian businessman, also of Pakistani descent, Tahawur Rana, actively participated in planning for the 26/11 attacks on Mumbai. That's in 2008, in which 166 people were killed, including 6 Americans. They were murdered by Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists in Mumbai. Now, India has been asking for the extradition of David Headley, but this was turned down by the US, and Headley is now serving a 35-year jail sentence in a US prison. The other agent in our story is Vikas Yadav. He was a CRPF officer, formerly with the RAW. He was in fact dismissed after the US made these allegations of his involvement in a plot to kill Gurpatwant Singh Pannun. And who's Gurpatwant Singh Pannun? He's a Canadian US national who's been designated a terrorist by India. Now, India has termed the case against Yadav as baseless allegations. But even if there was some truth to it, Yadav had only conspired to assassinate Pannun, a terrorist declared by India. There was no actual act of violence. And the irony of this case against Vikas Yadav, is the fact that Gurpatwant Singh Pannun is alive and he is well in the United States. He continues to advocate secessionism and violence against India. In fact, he's just warned Indians of attacks on Air India flights between the 1st and the 19th of November. And there's an Indian intelligence agent who's in the dock for trying to assassinate a designated terrorist. On the News9 Plus show today, we're looking at what options India has. What are the big questions in this case? Question number 1, does the US have double standards when it comes to its own national security interests? How strong is the case against Vikas Yadav? What happens next in this case, for instance? And finally, can India still ask for David Headley's extradition, one of the masterminds of one of the worst terror attacks on Indian soil in 2008? Joining me to discuss this are Dr. Rajiv Nanda, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court of India, Adit Kothari, Geopolitical and Foreign Affairs Expert. In the studio, I have with me Justin Thomas, and also joining us is Major General VK Datta, formerly with the Indian Special Forces. He's held several tenures in Special Forces and Special Units. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. General Datta, I want to start by asking you this. Do as we say, but not as we do. Does the United States have double standards when it comes to its own foreign interests, its own national security interests? It assassinates people who are anti-US, wherever they are, whichever part of the world. But if any other country allegedly tries to do the same, their agents are indicted in US courts and their summons are made for their extradition. What strikes you about this particular case, the difference between David Headley, who is a US agent who's planted into the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and allegedly Vikas Yadav, who's supposed to have conspired to kill a terrorist who India has declared a terrorist, who's planning attacks against Indian citizens on Indian soil, who's hiding in the US and freely preaching violence against Indian citizens? General Datta.
Yeah, Sandeep, this is one country which has carried out attacks of all kinds all over the world and has got away with impunity. If you talk about human rights violations, well,
Right.
Here is the country. If you talk about planned attacks on foreign leaders or say military leaders in an international arena, done by the USA. This is the country. Now you can't say, there's an old saying, you must have heard, my dog is Tommy and your dog is Kutta type. So
Yes.
this is the equation. Now, if US wants to apply the same standards, they should also be held liable for the same activities they have done internationally, and they can be tried in the International Court of Justice. So now comes the question that what has Yadav done? He's done nothing. There's nothing you can prove in the court of law
Right.
against him.
Right.
Now, as far as Reddy is concerned, he was part of a complete conspiracy in which a number of foreigners were killed in 2611 attacks in Mumbai.
Yes.
Why not he be sent back to India for trial or for whatever the Indian law holds? Because this act was done on the Indian soil by the proxies of Pakistan and by Pakistan direct involvement by ISI. So therefore, how can America say that the Indian agent was trying and planning? I'm also trying and planning.
Right.
I want Pannun dead.
Right.
Can you try me for that? I want him dead. I
Right.
want every enemy of India dead wherever he is.
Right.
So that is it. So
Absolutely.
therefore, when you talk about law, when you talk about the equation between nations, you can't have double standards.
Yes.
Just because you are a superpower, you got a lot of money, you are economically powerful, your dollar is floating around all over the world. That is it. So it is a question, jiski lathi uski bhans.
Right.
So the other party, we
Yes.
as Indians,
Yes.
are largest democracy in the world, don't get cowed down by this.
Absolutely.
And if you are going to
Yes,
push
yes.
us somewhere further, we will retaliate, definitely.
That seems to be the case in this case, at least from the facts of the case that have been put out in the United States, that Vikas Yadav conspired to kill a designated terrorist on US soil. Of course, that nothing prevents the US from doing the same. It has killed its own citizens on foreign soil wherever they've been found advocating violence and terrorism against its own interests. But I want to ask Dr. Rajiv Nanda, the contours of this case. Dr. Nanda, Vikas Yadav is being charged in a US court with a conspiracy to plan the assassination of a US national on US soil. How strong is the case against him? Based on the evidence that you've seen, you've studied the court documents that have been put out there since last year. How much of a case does the US have to demand Vikas Yadav's extradition?
See, as far as extradition is concerned, there is a treaty between India and USA, which was signed on 25th of June 1997, and
Yes.
it came in effect in 1999 July.
Right, right.
I think it was 21st or 22nd of July.
Yes.
It has various provisions under which either of the signing states can request the other state to hand over a particular person to the other country, to the requestee country, that so and so is a criminal under my law, and so is a criminal under your law also. It has various articles.
Right.
But I must here say, if Article 5.1 of this treaty is read,
Right.
India has all the rights to deny the extradition because this is politically motivated.
Right.
If there is a politically motivated, the requesting state is making a politically motivated request, the
Right.
requestee state can always decline, and so can India do in this case. Because Vikas Yadav, these are all planted things. There is nothing against him.
Right.
If we compare David's case,
Yes.
we had put in much stronger case at that
Yes.
point of time. And I must point out here
Right.
that it was the treaty which came in effect in 1999 has
Yes.
a clause under Article 1
Yes.
that even if the criminal had committed offense prior to signing of this, he too could be handed over. So answering your first part, whether we can still make a request about David Headley, yes, we can make a request. And second part, whether we should hand over Vikas Yadav, no. This is a politically motivated. Under 5.1, India can always refuse, say, point blank, no, this is a politically motivated thing, I decline, I put my foot down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Doctor, for putting that in perspective. The fact that we can actually turn down Vikas Yadav's extradition under that Article 5.1 that you mentioned. But, you know, speaking of 2611, some months back we spoke with then National Security Advisor, Mr. M.K. Narayanan, about what the US knew about 2611. Just listen to what he has to say.
David Hadley was a double agent. The Americans did not want him to be fully exposed. So all that he probably shared with the Americans was not shared with us in terms of intelligence. If we had that, I'm sure that we would have been able to deal with the situation far better. So, yes, the scale of the attack surprised us. I would even say shocked us. The Hadley confession came much after the Americans had milked him of everything that he had to do. But that was only confirmation of what we had. It took us a little time. I mean, there was intelligence is anticipation followed by investigation. So the investigation confirmed what we had already anticipated as far as this was concerned.
You know, Adit, this is a raw wound for Indians, even 16 years after 2611. The fact that the United States, which is a close strategic partner of India, actually knew about the 2611 attacks and chose not to inform us, not give us the full picture, as you heard the then NSA say. Why is it that we never really took this up with the Americans in the way that we ought to have back then? And is it too late for us to do anything about this case now?
Thanks for having me, Siddharth. I think first and foremost, there seems to be a lack of reciprocity that Indian diplomacy has had for a very long time. Maybe due to the fact that the Americans have always been extremely powerful and have been extremely dominating in a certain sense. That could be one of the reasons, but also because we've relied on them for a lot of intelligence gathering and sharing. In this instance, as Mr. Narayan clearly pointed out, that because Daud himself, in this case, Daud Gilani and David Headley, because he was so close in proximity to the American intelligence establishment, especially to the DEA, because he was essentially working as a drug gathering intelligence officer. So they probably fear that he may be able to provide India with much more information than actually needed, and which is why his extradition was never approved, and it will never be approved in the near future, as compared to someone like Tahir Rana, whose extradition has actually been approved by the Los Angeles court. It's a different matter that his lawyers are now basically using other tactics to basically frustrate the Indian agencies. But to the fact that Western hypocrisy exists, this is a case in point in time. All of these issues, if we go back to the Khalistan and the Kashmir, the Jammu Kashmir issue, at the end of it all, at the heart of it all, lies British intelligence, the American intelligence, the Anglo-Saxon enterprises. And they are the ones who've created these Frankensteins. There was a report which was filed by Colin Bloom for the Westminster for the British Parliament last year, which basically called out the government to say that you've created these problems, and today these problems are essentially becoming the problem for the civil society at large. So, something needs to be done about it, and the political correctness basically needs to be kicked into the dustbin.
Absolutely.
So, Siddharth?
Yes. Thanks.
At the heart of it all.
Yes. Yeah, please continue.
At the heart of it all lies the Western hypocrisy, the double standards, where their terrorists are everybody's terrorists, but our terrorists, our criminals, our extremists become their asylum seekers, their political asylum seekers, or their citizens.
Absolutely. Western hypocrisy, Western double standards, and the lack of reciprocity, as Adit Kothari just told us. Justin, does that surprise you in the very least?
No, it doesn't, because if you've seen the US government records on, let's say, Pannun's case, everywhere it looks like as if the fact that he's a terrorist, he's been inciting violence, is nowhere, it's missing completely.
Yes.
It's like they have, compartmentalized it, just like the Niger case across that pond from in Canada,
Yeah.
where they don't talk about the violations, the visa violations, they don't talk about the criminal activities, or Pannun being threatening Indian airliners, threatening the Prime Minister, different embassy people, everything is missing. Only compartmentalized factors like, he is an US citizen, he's an activist. So it reminds me of a gangster series in India where a politician goes to the gangster and says, hey, your son has done this, and the gangster looks at him and says, you know what, it doesn't matter what he has done, what matters is he's my son. So I think that's the treatment that these guys are giving these people. So they might be terrorists, they might be plotting, but it doesn't matter as long as they are US citizens.
They're US citizens and they've safe haven. And just a few hours ago, as I was just telling you all, the Pannun, Gurpatwan Singh Pannun has asked Indians not to fly between the 1st and the 19th of November because something could go wrong with the aircraft. And we know what happened back in 1985. So these are threats that cannot be taken lying down. And this is the irony of the situation, Justin. The fact that you have a US citizen calling for terror attacks against Indian airlines from a safe haven in the United States, and the US does nothing about it, doesn't even mention it, doesn't bring it up in any of these conversations.
What do you think would have happened if that guy was an Arab and he was talking about a Jewish airliner?
There would be a Predator drone flying over him in a few...
there's a very lot of different pointers that you have to look into. It's not a clean thing that they're just saying it and giving it to you. There are a lot of ifs and buts and commas and asterisks that you have to go through. All that, by the end of it, the case is gone. Because the Headley case clearly, in 2015, I believe that they had agreed to not extradite in exchange of information provided by David Headley. So David Headley is not going to be ever extradited. He's going to be forever, because there are so many DAS secrets that I think the US will not like him to spell out their business in Afghanistan.
Yes.
How much the money, drugs that they infiltrated there to provide weapons. So that kind of, legacies.
So, Justin, because I researched this Headley case, a very curious case of the double agent Headley for my book, and that's when I realized that he was actually infiltrated into the Lashkar because they believed, the US intelligence believed, the Lashkar had a hotline to Al-Qaeda, and therefore the Lashkar leaders would know where Osama bin Laden was hiding, and that was the whole purpose of infiltrating Headley as a double agent. And it only turns out that he was exposed 2 years after the 26/11 attacks because he turned out to be a triple agent, that he was actually planning to carry out attacks against Europeans. The Danish newspaper which published the Prophet Muhammad cartoons, the plan was for David Headley and his bunch of terrorists to go and attack that newspaper, take those journalists hostages, decapitate them, create a 26/11 kind of scenario in Copenhagen. And that is when the US intelligence woke up and said, this guy has gone rogue. And that's when they arrested him and they tried him and they've put him into jail for 35 years. So the earliest we can see David Headley is 2048.
So I think there is very common, that Anglo interests that is across both
convergence of interests. The Five Eyes converge on a number of interests. Dr. Rajiv Nanda, we are looking at the number of fugitives that have been extradited on Indian request. So far, 19 have been extradited from the UAE, 9 from the US, and only 1 fugitive from the UK on charges of murder and criminal conspiracy. And you have this conspiracy of silence among the Five Eye countries that whenever it comes to Khalistan or so-called political issues like this, they all seem to close ranks. So Gurpatwan Singh Pannun can freely move between the US and the Canada and possibly even the United Kingdom, and you can't do anything about it. What is it that we can really do, Dr. Nanda, as we are democracies, we play by the rules? How can you highlight this politically motivated cases like this, the fact that there is a lack of reciprocity when you're talking of being strategic partners with the United States or with Britain or whichever Five Eyes countries you have, when it comes to issues like this, we seem to have very little heft.
See, it is very unfortunate. When a treaty is signed between the two independent sovereign powers,
yes,
both the signing partners are equally responsible for all the act theoretically to say.
Yes.
But here we always see that US has been doing the dadagiri all over. When it comes to, as the earlier speaker said, when it comes to their terrorists, it is everybody's terrorist. When it comes to
Yes.
our terrorists, it is, I mean, nothing. We have perhaps also lacked when it came to Pannu's case. We, to my understanding, have not been able to provide very much strong evidences against him, except being very vocal about.
Right.
No solid evidences have been, because our intelligence didn't have that much.
Right.
But nevertheless, I will say that now, since we are aware of it, and now
Yes.
since we have that material against him, we can still put it forward and say that please expedite him, extradite him. This is like we have to play very smartly on the diplomatic channel, press his extradition. Otherwise, there's nothing that we can do except to break the treaty.
Right, absolutely. We have no options except to break the treaties. But General Datta, I understand your angst about rotten apples like Gurpatwan Singh Pannu. You fought insurgency, you fought Khalistani terrorists, you fought all manner of terrorists for decades. And now you see this very incredible scenario where you have our strategic partners across the Atlantic who are actually sheltering elements like this, who are inciting a movement that soldiers like you and many others like worked very hard to fight in the 80s and the 90s. What is it that India can really do now in 2024 to ensure that people like Gurpatwan Singh Pannu are not a threat?
See, the thing is that you must also remember that there's an election due in the US now.
Yes.
And all this activity being done supporting Pannu is to garner the votes of the so-called people who want to create Khalistan in India.
Yes.
It is maybe a Khalistan may get created in Canada and not in India, because no Indian Sikh who is a true Sikh and citizen
Yes.
of India wants a Khalistan within the country. It is the people and the governments outside who are
Yes.
using these elements in twisting the arm of India for any personal gain which they might use in the future. But
Right.
that's what I said, that India is the largest democracy. India has got the strength to fight back and protect the national interest within India, to ensure that the India remains united as a nation and no power in the world is able to divide us. And this particular handle people have been using, whether it was Khalistan or it was J&K or
Yes.
it is the Northeast. And these are the powers which are involved. So it is a political game being played to garner votes in the upcoming election, where Trump on one side, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris fighting as opponents, and each one of them trying to woo the other to garner a vote. And same is the case what's happening in case of Israel. They're being
Yes.
held back to strike Iran. That is
Right.
all related to these elections.
Yes.
What Trump wants and what Joe Biden wants. So therefore, as far as I'm concerned, people have done their job in the past. People will continue doing it in the future, and India will remain intact and strong in times to come. And all such elements will find end one day, and maybe they'll meet an end in the same manner.
Right, they'll meet an end in some manner or the other. General Datta, we'll end this on a very positive note, as you just said. The fact is that, dogs bark, but the caravan continues. The caravan of India continues as it has for hundreds of years. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening to talk about the US double standards. I mean, there's one thing, Justin, that you can fight in the courts, which is the extradition of Vikas Yadav. There's no case, as Dr. Nanda was mentioning, that you have Article 5A, 5.1, it's a politically motivated case. It's another thing, but when you see our strategic partners, so-called strategic partners, pushing the agenda indirectly of secessionists, allowing them safe havens, allowing them to preach hatred, preach attacks, terror attacks against Indian citizens of the kind that people like Nijar and Gurpatwan Singh Pannu have been doing. So that's something that really, saddens us over here when we talk about this so-called two-way street that doesn't seem to exist. There's just a one-way street when it comes to the West and its agenda. That double standards that we are talking of, politically motivated allegations that we were we just heard from our panelists. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajiv Nanda, Major General Datta, Adit Kothari, and of course my colleague, Justin Thomas, in the studio here.